So we've got Charlotte Woods here, who's going to tell us in a bit more detail about her pilot study using Alexander Technique in a care home setting. And can we start with an idea of how the study came about? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. As I said in my introduction, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but basically, my mum moved into a residential care home in December 2018. No, 2016, sorry. And I spent a bit of time there and I really got to know all the staff and visitors and other residents quite well. Um, and over the course of the time that I was there, I realised that there were quite a lot of people that would benefit in various ways from, I thought, from what I knew of the technique from Alexander Technique lessons. Um, and there were kind of elderly residents, obviously, with mobility problems and sometimes a bit anxious or exhibiting behaviours that showed that they were distressed in some way. Care staff who were suffering with sort of back pain and joint pain and stress, and visitors, elderly visitors as well, who were similarly had the kind of problems that many older adults experience. And having worked with my mum in a very informal way, using the Alexander technique, basically just using the Alexander technique in moving her around, that kind of thing, I found it very helpful to myself in dealing with my own sort of emotions. And it helped my mum keep her mobile and keep her calm and all the rest of it. So I thought, actually, I think there's real scope here for the Alexander technique to help people who either have dementia or those who are caring for people with dementia. And I got the sense from talking to my Alexander colleagues that it's not something that they were particularly thinking about, and it's not anything that I'd read about or heard people talking about. I was quite kind of new, I hadn't long qualified, but it wasn't something that was on everyone's radar, put it that way. So I thought, well, hang on a minute, are we missing a trick as a community of Alexander teachers? Because dementia is something that is very widespread and it's increasing. It touches so many people's lives. I thought perhaps this is a way that we can really help. Um, anyway, I was a retired researcher, and I had conversations with management, and they agreed to allow me to do a kind of a small pilot study to test out this idea: can the Alexander technique help in a residential care setting with people with dementia and people that are caring for them?
That's great. Can you tell us a bit then? So you went on, you had permission, you went ahead to do the study. What was the purpose of the study, from your point of view, and what kind of questions were you aiming to answer?
Sure, yeah. Well, I had various purposes. I think the main one was basically just to test out my assumption that the Alexander technique could be helpful to residents and carers, and just to gather some data, basically. And I thought if I were able to gather some evidence that tended to support that assumption, it could lead on to a bigger study in my mum's care home, and then armed with a bit more data, I could use that as evidence to try and interest the wider public about the idea of the Alexander technique as something that might help people with dementia and people who are caring for people with dementia, but also to interest the research community, because I thought there's a limit to what you can do as a lone researcher, or even if there's just two or three teachers. But obviously, university researchers, if they're interested in that area, they can then take it up and introduce it into their studies, and therefore raise the profile of the whole idea, if you like. So that was the main purpose, I guess. Um, and so I suppose my questions were, as a pilot, is there evidence, is there any evidence that the Alexander technique can improve the well-being of people with dementia and people caring for those with dementia? And if so, in what ways can it help? And just as important, in a pilot study, I wanted to find out. It's quite difficult working in residential care. It's not an easy setting. Um, and I wanted to find out, what works, what were the challenges, what didn't work, sort of learn lessons to be learned, basically, about trying to research in that setting. So those were the main sort of purposes and questions.
So some very individual ones about what happens when you teach an individual, but also sort of bigger aims, I suppose,
Yeah,
around finding out the usefulness.
yeah.
So having decided on your questions, what kind of study did you opt for? And what made you kind of make that decision? Why was that a good decision
Yeah.
in terms of study design?
Okay, well, what I went for was a case study, which is a kind of a descriptive approach. And it's got a very long history in clinical practice. And in case study work, you're looking at an individual case, which might be an individual person, it might be an individual institution, like a school or a hospital or whatever, or it might be a phenomenon. But here, what I was doing, I was looking at the four participants, each as an individual case. And the thing about the case study is it's very flexible. You can draw on lots of different kinds of data, which is what I did. So I used different data with the different participants because they all had individual capacities and individual problems. Um, and what you do is you analyze each of the cases separately and write them up so you end up with four separate reports or four separate pieces of writing about one on each case. And that was the way I saw it. It was the best way to go. It's not like if you're sort of looking at a particular ailment where you've got specific symptoms that maybe are measurable, that you can look at across cases and make generalizations. We're talking about very small numbers, only four participants, and all very, very individual. So it seemed to me the most logical way to go, or the only way really that I could see that made sense. Um, and what it does allow you to do when you've got your four cases written up, you can then look across the cases and sort of take general lessons from it, which is what I ended up doing.
That's great. That's really helpful and sets the scene for us and gives us an idea of the background to the study. Thank you.